Hello and welcome to another edition of the Brattlecast. This is Jordan Rich. Great to be with you and always fun to be with Ken Gloss. And of course, there are times when we're actually in front of other people, not just podcasting to the world. That happened last week. I invited you to a beautiful building downtown Boston near the store called the Millennium Tower, and you were a big hit, my friend.
Well, my ego feels good about that, but I find it a lot of fun to do talks at buildings, libraries, historical society. It's a way for me to get to see people who might not always come in the store, although this group was just around the corner. But the interaction, the back and forth, the question and answer, I mean, I like talking to people. So it was a lot of fun. I enjoy doing it. And I try to keep up a pretty active schedule of doing appearances.
Well, the scuttlebutt was very positive, and people kept saying, I can't believe he's got that much energy and enthusiasm. And I said, trust me, he does. And the store is hopping all the time. In fact, that's a perfect segue because you were taking questions, folks coming up afterwards one-on-one. And one of the ladies from the building had a question about decorating her condo or whatever with books and whether or not you do that. We've talked a little bit about this in the past. Thought we'd zero in on that.
Well, there's a lot of that comes up, and actually, it's a regular thing. When one of our managers in particular does a lot with decorating, and it's interesting because you don't necessarily think of a bookstore decorating, but if you're a film crew and you're doing a movie or you're doing an advertisement, or you maybe it's someone who has a theater and they ask for background, and or sometimes in model homes they need books to fill in. A nice book background and library makes a place feel a lot classier. But we get all sorts of questions, and one of the first things we ask is, well, okay, how are you decorating? What's your idea? And these are questions that you might not think of with books, because when you're decorating, the first question is, how many feet of shelves? Because we know that about 10 average books fill a foot of shelf space.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone says they have 5 feet of shelves, we know that you need 50 or 60 books. If they say they have 100 feet of shelves, then you might need 500,000 books. The next question we ask is, are the shelves adjustable, or do they have a certain height? Because, if your shelves are only 6 or 7 inches tall, we generally don't cut off the tops of the books to make them fit.
Right.
But it's a real issue. Is it adjust? Do you want big books? Do you want little books? And then the next question that you can ask is, well, what's the look? What's the color? I mean, do you want browns, dark colors, blacks, or do you need like bright colors, yellows, blues? Uh, Again, it's not something that you necessarily think of. And I will tell you that if it's old leather brown bindings, the browns are more common. If it's regular books and you just want to color, red bindings are much more common than blue or yellow or green. So when people start telling us that, we take into consideration, gee, if you need this many, it might be tough in that color.
So you work not only with the movie folks, we've talked about that, but you work with decorators, interior decorators who want to service their clients, and they know a bit more about what might fit, right? I mean, not that
Oh,
anybody off the street can't do it, but it must be fun working with these professionals.
it's a lot of fun. Or sometimes we'll get a call from a new hotel opening up, and they have a bar, and they might say, well, we need it. We want it to be fall-like colors or summer-like colors. But then it's interesting because we have outside stands at $1 and 3 and 5, and we can just randomly get books as much as we want from that. What we tell people though is every time you say but, it gets more expensive. In other words, if you say, yeah, we want red books, but they have to be very nice leather, or we want them, but they have to have about nature and natural history and gardening. Well, every time you go, but it's a little more specific, or they need to be books about Boston or Boston history or art books, but they need to be art books of this period or this time.
Right.
Other things that can come up is if it's a movie or a play, you don't want books. If the play is set in the 1960s, you really can't have books from the 1990s or 2000s. You can have books from the 1860s. If the play is or movie is about a scientist, well, maybe you want to find some math books or biographies of science professors or textbooks even of certain
Yeah,
subjects.
well, it bears mentioning at this point that you and your team can get just about anything. You have thousands of tomes in your possession anyway, but you know how possible it is to get whatever anybody needs with that additional but attached to it.
Well, and then one of the big questions is, what's your budget?
Hmm.
Because some people go, well, we want to spend a couple of dollars or $3 or $4 a book. And okay, there's lots of books in that price range, uh, but you don't get as much selection. Also, people say, well, we have 100 feet of books, which is 1,000 books. They say, oh, we just need a library. And you say, well, wait a minute, at $10, $15 a book, that can be 10, 15, $20,000. And a lot of people go, oh,
Mm.
you know,
Think
uh,
twice. Yeah.
and then there are other people who are, really sort of saying, we're planning a library. We might not want to do this all at once, but here's what we need for this or that. It might be a special occasion. We just got a call today. They're planning a bar mitzvah,
Hmm.
and they wanted the table settings, the centerpieces, to be books. And it was interesting because uh, we said to them, well, we can do that. Is there any type of pattern? They said, no, it's more the look. Uh, and they said, could you pick them out for us? And well, we said, we need a little bit of input and feedback. And sometimes we'll send pictures of what they look like. And if their budget is really low, we'll say, look, we can help you come into the store, pick things out, and we'll change it around. But there's only so much time. And then the person said to us, well, can we just rent the books? And we do that a lot of times for movie sets or theater or things that just need temporary backgrounds. Well, and usually it's about 25% per week for what the books might be. But if they're more expensive books, but if they're like $3 and $5 books, we go, no, we don't rent those. If you want to deal with them afterwards, donate them to a library book sale. A lot of it, the cost is the time and labor, but it can be fascinating. Matter of fact, when we were talking about table settings for a bar mitzvah, um, we had a very, very good friend getting married in California about 7 or 8 years ago, and they wanted a book theme. And I said, well, look, what I'll do for you is give us an idea of what the theme is, how many books you need, what it is, and that will be your wedding present. So we did that. And then when my daughter got married, which is now over 10 years ago, she got married at the Boston Public Library. And can you imagine that she, getting married at the Boston Public Library, wanted a book theme? The wedding cake was in the shape of a book, but all of the table settings were book and book style. And I didn't charge her.
Oh, you're such a nice daddy, and boy, that sounds like the right event for the right person. I
Yeah,
wanted to ask you if you recall, and this is more of a local reference, but I bet it's true around the country in various places. There was a time when restaurants were going with books as decorative arrangements. Could think of several. The Colorado Public Library chain. There was one called Michael's Restaurant in Framingham, west of Boston, and it was very popular. People would sit and dine, and you could actually reach over and grab a book while you were there. But I don't know if that's still happening in restaurants, but it really was a nice motif.
it's not happening quite to the degree it was then. And we did supply hundreds of books to
I'm
some
not
of those
surprised.
places.
Not surprised.
Um, but what we tend to get now more is like in the behind the bar, there might be a bookcase or there might be a shelf or two in the restaurant, sort of as you come in behind the maitre d' or something like that. They not as much. Now, one of the things that I point out to people, if you have the whole place surrounded by books, it saves you on heat in the winter. It's great insulation. But I have to admit, the ones you mentioned, one was in Brookline Village and one was a chain, is when I go into those places, of course, I start looking at the books.
Right.
And every once in a while, I've gone, wow, there's some really, really good books here.
A
And
cobbler and his shoes. Absolutely. No, I can understand that. And I remember going to these restaurants and occasionally finding something that was really surprising and old and looked rare. But then again, if you were supplying them, then they were in good shape. I mean, they had the right supplier. So another question that comes to mind when people are deciding to do this and they want maybe beyond books, maybe they want magazines, maybe they want flyers, for parties and things like that. Can you also support that?
oh yeah, we get that a lot of times. Matter of fact, we had someone in recently, especially for birthdays or anniversaries. They might say, "Do you have a bunch of magazines or so on from this year or that year, or one or two particular?" And we did a lot more of that before the internet. Since the internet, we will still do it, but a lot of people can go online and pretty easily get a particular year or so on. But they make great gifts, and then you start flipping through them, and it's a great topic of conversation. It might be a graduation or a tenth year of graduating, a 20th year, or reunions.
Right.
Yes, we do that, and it's it's just a lot of fun. I sometimes have seen things and I go, well, gee, I was born then, and I start paging through, or I graduated from high school in that year and college in this one, and it can be a lot of fun. Or if the magazine is from someplace where you've been at a certain time and you look back at it, yeah, that can be a set for decorating too.
So to sum up, I think we're talking about the value of a book well beyond, in some cases, just the words on the page. We've talked about books and manuscripts and all kinds of things that have value, but this is another value that's very special to people when they decorate their homes or their parties or their.
Well, a lot of times people relate books to scholarliness, intelligence, which then adds a prestige and a sort of an overall feel for a place. And I think that's one of the reasons that when restaurants or parties or whatever decorate with books, it's also in a way of giving an idea of being an interesting person, being intelligent, having a lot of interests. And so I think that adds that to the setting, and that's why people use books for that.
And your
Matter of
phone
fact,
is.
maybe someone's calling
I
now.
was just thinking someone is looking to add prestige to their life. Ken, this was really fun and fascinating as it always is. And of course, the Brattlecast comes to you regularly across all channels, and you can go to brattlebookshop.com. I wish you a wonderful day. And if I ever have a child or a grandchild getting married, I'll look you up for a little decoration help.
We would be more than happy to. And Jordan, you get our special rate. I would do it for you in any case.
Wonderful.